In this video, I'm going to walk you through step by step a process where your law firm can look at the marketing activities that it's been doing, come up with a plan for the marketing activities it's going to do, and then come up with a strategy to actually execute that plan as opposed to putting it in a drawer and then leaving it there until this time next year when you come back and watch the video again. So strap in, it's going to be a slightly longer video than normal. I hope you'll stick around to the end, and welcome to my law firm marketing guide. My name's Chris Hargraves. I'm from Known, Liked and Trusted, where we develop and execute digital marketing strategies for lawyers and law firms. And in this video, it's going to be a little bit longer and a little bit more staged than you might be used to from me. I really don't like editing particularly much, so if I make a mistake, there's a pretty good chance I'm going to barrel on through. Feel free to point it out and criticize me in the comments if you really feel like it. Chances are I've already made some, and that in itself is a lesson for executing your marketing strategy, but it's one we can come back to another time. So, what is our process going to be? I don't want to pretend for a moment that over the next little while I'm going to share with you every single actionable marketing strategy that your firm can actually execute, because frankly, if I could do that in the relatively short space of time available, I would be out of the job. It's actually more complicated than what I'm going to share here. You already know that. I already know that. What I'm going to do, though, is give you a framework to look at what you've been doing and assess it for efficacy. Take a look at what options are there that you could be doing, maybe ditching some of the things you had been attempting, and then coming up with a plan to actually execute those things that you have decided upon. This is not necessarily a process you need to do by yourself. It is helpful to have another person, whether that's a hired person or an internal staff member or whatever you have available, to bounce ideas off, to have a bit of a brainstorming session for a lot of these topics. Because if you get stuck too much inside your own head, it's not necessarily going to go that well, because you don't know what you don't know, shockingly enough. And there might be options available that you literally have never heard of, but might be a fantastic fit for your particular firm. I'm going to keep it relatively high level, not super high level, but not super granular, okay? We're somewhere in the middle, which means I'm going to have 3 steps because 3 is an elegant number and makes for a nice video format. And shockingly enough, when I was making my notes earlier, each of those 3 steps has 4 sub-steps. At least that's how I've written it down. As I speak it to you, it may come out completely different. So we'll just have to see how things go. And if you want to naturally jump back and forth, you can do that as well as you miss things, okay? So we're looking at a law firm marketing guide, essentially, is what we're doing. We're looking at how to make some strategic decisions, how to land upon things, and how to actually get going. What's our first step? Unless you are a brand new law firm, you need to take a look at what has been happening in the past. Things that worked, things that didn't work, things that could be improved, but how are you actually going to do that? Well, in our case, we're going to do it with a 4-step process, okay? I told you each of my 3 steps has 4 sub-steps, and that makes for a nice little dot point list, and I know lawyers like dot point lists. I love them too. It's just one of our things. So, what did you do? Question number 1. Not what did you do once, okay? If you posted one comment on LinkedIn about how you made Doyle's guide, that does not count as a LinkedIn strategy. Okay, so that's not something you did. That doesn't belong on this list. What marketing endeavors did you actually do? Were you actually executing in a semi-reliable fashion? If you published an article, that doesn't count. If you published 10 articles, that probably does count, okay? What are the things that actually formed the mainstay of your digital marketing efforts that you did relatively reliably and relatively repeatably, even if they didn't go completely according to plan, because very little ever goes completely according to plan? What did you give a crack at? Okay, that's really the question. Make a little list. You will require a pen and paper for this exercise. If you really want to go all sort of new tech on me, then you can use a computer. But a pen and paper is a nice way to do it because it allows you to make easy notes, and I just find it better, frankly. So, what did you do? Make a list of the things that formed the foundation of your marketing efforts. I'm going to talk in this video principally about digital marketing because that's kind of my shtick. But of course, if you want to apply this to a more broader subset of your marketing, you want to look at sponsorships, you want to look at face-to-face catch-ups, you want to look at cold calling, whatever it is that you might have done as part of your marketing strategy, then take a look at writing down what you actually did. Okay, that's step 1. Take a minute to do that, then come back. I'm not going to pause every time to wait for you to do it because this video will just get much too long. It's like one of those self-help videos where they say, write down all of your goals for the next 27 years right now. And then there's just dead silence for 5 minutes while you write down your next 27 years worth of goals. I'm not doing that, okay? Write it down, come back. So the next question to ask after figuring out what you actually did, and it might be a long list, it might be a short list, that's going to depend on your firm. What worked? Do you actually have a good handle on which of your marketing strategies worked and which didn't? Now, what worked is a relatively loaded question because it depends what your goals were for that marketing activity in the first place. For the purposes of this video, I'm going to look at worked from the point of view of engagement in some fashion. That is, you're going to dig into your analytics and you're going to look at a few things there. Now, if you had other methodologies or analytics set up where you can measure what worked and what didn't, then I encourage you to look into those too. What do I mean by that? Our starting point is going to be the basic, what some people will call vanity metrics. But if you had, say, set up in your analytics goals, which led to newsletter signups, and the core of your fundamental digital marketing strategy was newsletter signups, and you actually have been able to measure that effectively, then that's a worthwhile metric to look at as well. But for our purposes, we're going to look at the absolute ground level fundamentals because nearly everyone can access this information and you don't require a degree in rocket science to navigate your way to the necessary content flow to actually figure out what led to what, led to what, led to you actually getting a phone call from someone at the end of the day. Okay, so principally, what you need to do is look at your analytics in the relevant platform, and then you need to figure out, say, what were the top 10 performing things that you did. Let me give you an example. So in Google Analytics, almost everyone is going to have Google Analytics connected to their website, and if you don't, then you really need to do that right now, okay? Stop the video and go and figure out how to put Google Analytics on your site, like literally at this very moment. I'm assuming you probably do. You may or may not have accessed it for some time. Now is your opportunity to access it. So for your website statistics, so we're looking at website content, okay? What was your best performing website content over the last 12 months? Now, you may or may not have produced this content in the last 12 months. That doesn't really matter for the purposes of this exercise. What you're going to do is you're going to load up your analytics, you're going to look at site content, you're going to look at pages, and you're going to get your top 10 pages by traffic. If you can't figure out how to do that semi-intuitively, then you can probably Google, ironically enough, how to do that. It's not particularly difficult. You're 3 or 4 clicks away. The main thing to do is to change your date range. It's usually up in the top right corner, depending on what system you are using, to be the last 365 days. That way you have a year's worth of available data. What were your top 10 pages by percentage? That's what we're getting at. And that's how we can start to look at what worked from a metric perspective. What can we do then? We can look at how many people were on those pages. We can look at how long they were on those pages. If your top page is a 9,000 word article, but the average time on that page is 9 seconds, you're not necessarily going to count that as a huge success, okay? So you need to think about those things a little bit. But for now, we're just looking at, hey, look at that. This article on liquidated damages did really well. This article on divorce and separation did really well. This article on reasonable doubt did really well. Figure out what it was that went well, okay? For other platforms, it's going to be a little bit different. I'm not going to go through every single one, but you might go to your LinkedIn analytics, you might go to your Facebook analytics, you might go to your YouTube analytics, or if you use email marketing, which I encourage you to, you might go to your email broadcast analytics. What are the things that did best? I would suggest coming up with 10 within each category. If that is basically everything you did over the year, then come up with 5. But look at the things. There are normally, for most people, a few things that simply outperformed everything else. And once you have those, we need to ask the next question, which is, why did those things outperform everything else? Is it because they're more on topic? Is it because they're better articles? Is it because there was a particular news cycle that you happened to jump on and you just managed to scrape through before everyone else, and so you got the lion's share of the traffic associated with that thing. We call that newsjacking, if you're unfamiliar with that. What was it, as far as you can tell? This is going to be a little bit of guesswork to some extent, but you can usually intuitively figure out what it was about that article that you think did well. It may be as simple as, I know for a fact that this is a topic the people I serve really care about, and it was a cracker of an article that offered some practical advice to help them solve the issues on that. It can be that simple, okay? Don't overwork this process necessarily. So we've looked at what we did and what worked well. Now we need to look at the flip side of that question, which is, what didn't we do, or what did we do poorly? Okay, now this could be something that takes a little while, but what are the things within the normal mainstay of digital marketing endeavors that you simply didn't do? Maybe it's because you opted out, maybe because it stayed in your to-do list for the entire 12 months of last year, whatever the case may be. What are the things that you know would form a normal part of a functioning digital marketing system that you or your firm simply did not get to? And if you're having trouble coming up with ideas, the obvious ones are going to be these. Did you produce content? What format was that content in? Did you only write things? Did you do video? Did you do audio? Did you do images? Okay, those are your typical content types. If you are on social media, which platform or platforms were you on? Now, we need to be careful about being on a platform. Auto-broadcasting all of your material to 16 different social media platforms does not necessarily mean you were on that platform. You might count it that way or you might not, but as a general principle, most firms tend to have a major or dominant social media platform. It's often Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, if you count that as a social media channel, which you sort of could, or LinkedIn. Now, there might be others, maybe your firm's on Reddit, maybe you're on Twitter, maybe you're doing lots of other stuff. But whatever the case may be, if you're on a channel, what are the other dominant channels? There's a lot of social media out there. What are the other dominant channels that you're not on, or you wanted to be on but didn't get to, or that you're just not doing very well at? Okay, these are the things that you didn't do well, you didn't do often enough, you never really learned the ecosystem, the things you're just not happy with your performance on them, or you literally didn't turn up to the party at all. Fear not, the next step is not going to be me telling you you need to be on all of these social media channels. It's going to be a little bit more sane and sensible than that. But you need to figure out what it is you didn't do, or what at least was working poorly, before we get on to stage 2, which is obviously coming up in the planning process. That essentially, though, is our review process. And you can make as much or a little as that as you want, but that is our way of going, okay, I know what I did, I know what went well, I have an idea, I think, of why the things that went well actually went well, and I have an idea of what I didn't do or what didn't go well. That article I wrote just wasn't very good. I knew I was busy. It didn't work for me. It's at the bottom of the list. I know that I literally didn't do a video, so that wasn't going very well, even though I intended to at the start of the year. Whatever the case may be, we have a nice review now of the opportunities that we haven't yet availed ourselves of, and of the strengths we have with our existing program. Okay? Notice it's relative. I'm not giving you absolute metrics. I'm not saying put a line under everything that had at least 10,000 page views and don't worry about the rest, because if you only got 27 page views, then that was clearly a piece of trash. For starters, if you're a new law firm, the kinds of bigger numbers that larger or more established firms with really a lot of resources devoted to this process are not going to be available to you. Okay, it takes effort, it takes time, it takes work. Just look at what went well from a relative sort of analysis rather than from an absolute position. Okay, and that is the review process. Now we can move on to the execution process. Okay, so now we get to the part that most lawyers and law firms are typically very good at, which is we get to the planning stage. We've already done the review process, so we have an idea of our existing activities. To some extent, we already have a bit of a plan because we've looked at last year's efforts and we know what we were already doing, we know what went well. We've started to think in our head, almost inevitably as part of that process, about the things we could be doing going forward. But now we're actually going to start landing on a few decisions. Now, I am a believer in the idea that most sensibly executed marketing strategies have some degree of an opportunity of being successful if you do them well. So, to some extent, we could really overthink that process. And I know lawyers are risk averse, and we particularly don't want to invest our time or our money in something that doesn't at least have a pretty good shot at being a successful program. But at the same time, we sometimes analyze and worry ourselves to death and therefore don't do anything. And it's like, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take, kind of whatever that motivational quote happens to be. It's that kind of scenario where we're so worked up with trying to figure out what the perfect strategy is because we're so concerned about wasting time or money that as a result, we actually have no strategy. And shockingly enough, having no strategy is one of the strategies that does not work particularly well. But if you're tying yourself in stitches, worrying about whether you should be on Facebook or whether LinkedIn, just go with yes. Pick one or pick the other one or pick both. But there's a point at which you need to actually land upon a decision in order for this process to be at all helpful. There is, however, a methodology that we can take a look at, okay? That's going to help us a little bit to figure out that we're making sane decisions. So this process, as the last one in our nice little elegant 3x4 sort of matrix that we've got going here, is a 4-step process. And we're going to look at things to ditch from last year, okay? Things to add, those opportunities that we haven't availed ourselves of properly. We're going to look at things to improve. So this is the things that went okay, or the things that went well, that we think are worthwhile continuing to invest our time in, and to improve along the way, because we always want to be looking at that element of improvement and not just go, oh, it was good, we'll just keep doing it at good sorts of levels, because that's not a helpful thing to do. But the last step in the process is one of the more important ones, which is the external sanity check component of the process. Okay, so let's walk through those 4 steps. The first thing is things to ditch. So some of these are going to be easy. Maybe you decided to invest heavily in Snapchat and you have realized that that was a terrible decision. You've gotten functionally no meaningful traction from it, and so you're just going to kill off that particular idea. Maybe you downloaded the TikTok app. You did a couple of TikToks. Now you're concerned that all of your private information is being sold to people who are in organizations that you don't necessarily believe should have your personal information. And so you're going to delete TikTok. That one's gone, it's ditched. Okay, those things are sort of the no-brainer category of ditching. What about the ones where you actually gave it a decent effort, but you're not necessarily seeing traction yet? In a sense, these are going to be connected to our external sanity check. So we know with relative certainty, for example, that a strong content program is, over the span of time, going to deliver results if it is executed well. So if you are generating regular content, but it's not doing well, probably I would say more than going for the ditch this, it's not very good idea category, you should be looking at, well, why did my content not work particularly well? What wasn't working about it? What did I hope was going to work and what didn't happen and why didn't that happen? Now, there may be a hard truth or two in there, which is maybe your content just wasn't very good. Maybe your content was written targeting the wrong people. Maybe you're writing things sounding too much like a lawyer and not enough like someone that people actually want to hang around with. It could be any number of different things. Maybe you started doing the videos, but you never got through that part where you look like a sort of wooden automaton and you don't have any facial expression and that sort of stuff. That can be an issue too. So it might be, and I'm sorry if this is the case, but it might be that the things you produced just weren't very good. And the obvious solution is not to ditch them because the strategy is sound. It's the execution that was lacking. Okay, and this is where external sanity check will confirm this, which is content should really be a part of your strategy. So if you're looking at ditching content, you're not writing articles, you're not doing videos, you're not doing a podcast, you're not putting any content out. If you are looking at moving away from that, you would need to have a very good reason to do that. And perhaps you have another strategy that you believe is worthwhile taking that fairly enormous risk, but I wouldn't be recommending it personally. So What to ditch. Now, the other things you might ditch are things where there is a disconnect between what you decided to do and your potential audience. Okay, so you might be, for example, invested on a social media platform that is predominantly utilized by 18 to 25-year-olds. Now, if you are on that social media platform and you practice in, say, elder law, or you practice in um, divorce with a specialty on 57-year-old professional women with assets over $1 million in their own personal name, that's you knowing your audience very well there, then there might be a disconnect potentially. There might not be. So don't leap to strong conclusions about this. This is going to be an external sanity check situation. But maybe you took a punt that there was a growing market of your potential people hanging around on a particular social media platform, and so you invested some time in building up because you wanted to get that first mover advantage in terms of social media platforms. And you've realized that hasn't necessarily happened, and that perhaps there is better bang for your buck to be found elsewhere. That might be an area that you go, you know what, we're going to park that. We gave it a red hot crack. It was a good idea. We thought it would pan out, knowing it was a bit of a risk, but it's no longer a risk we're prepared to invest in. We're going to utilize that time and effort somewhere else. Okay, you might ditch that. The other thing you might look at ditching is potentially doing everything in-house. So you can, of course, outsource to people like me, depending on what it is you want to outsource and how you want to go about doing it. Obviously, you can't outsource you producing videos until the deepfake technology gets better and everyone's comfortable with someone actually pretending to be someone else, which I think is still a fair ways off. It's not really necessarily going to be the case that you can outsource that sort of intensely personal content creation process, but you can certainly outsource things like article production and things like posting on social media and a lot of that sort of stuff. So when I say ditching, there's really two elements, which is what do I just not want to do anymore? What does our firm not want to do anymore? And thinking about, and we're going to come back to this in the execution phase, thinking about the things we may not necessarily want to do in-house anymore so that we can keep ourselves really focused on those things that absolutely must be done by us personally. So that is what we're going to look at first. What to ditch. Then you should have hopefully a slightly shorter list from last year. You may decide you want to keep everything you did last year. That's fine, whatever. You may not have anything to ditch. Now we're going to look at things to add. Now this is going to be tricky if you don't have good visibility on the nature of marketing and the market generally. Okay, so if in doubt, if your firm is not regularly committed to the foundation elements of digital marketing, then you should probably be adding something in these areas. What do I mean by that? I mean, if you don't have content, a content strategy, a content program within one of those buckets I mentioned earlier, so that's going to be video or audio or articles or images or a combination of all of the above. So content, if you don't use email marketing, you don't have a process for capturing email addresses and then sending useful information to those people whose email addresses you have captured. If you don't have a social media strategy, and if you haven't revisited your website strategy, what is your website for? Is it achieving that for you? Are there other things you could be doing to make your website work better for your business? Not just how pretty it is and not just how fast it loads, those are relevant, but is it part of the strategic machinery to drive leads and potential clients in your direction? And if not, could it be more of that than it currently is? If you're not looking at those four things and don't have like one of those entire areas is completely missing from your marketing strategy, then I would be looking at adding in something there. Now, within each of them, there are, of course, choices. There are many social media platforms available to you. You need to look at the things that are going to be most helpful with connecting you with your clients. Now, any marketing strategy needs to be founded upon a sharp and detailed understanding of who your clients are or who you want them to be. You might have a few different areas, and therefore you might have a few different sort of subsets of your ideal client. It might be certain people here, certain people there, certain people there. You might have 3 different descriptions, but whatever the case, you need to know who they are. Because if you don't know who they are, you can't develop the strategies to connect you with them, to allow you to have conversations and provide them with value and interact with them and use the kind of language that they use so that you can become known, liked, and trusted, there it is, with an audience or a potential client base that you actually understand and who resonate, great marketing word, resonate with this sort of things you are doing, okay? That is the nature of digital marketing 101. You need to understand at a fundamental level who these people are that you're actually trying to reach. Now, why do I say that? Come back to my earlier example on social media. There is no point in you adopting a strategy of getting on Reddit for 2 hours every day if literally 1% of your potential clients are on Reddit and 99% of them are on LinkedIn. Okay? That would make no sense. You might personally enjoy Reddit, you might go there for tech news or for funny memes or whatever, but the fact is, you need to be on LinkedIn where 99% of your people go. So, if you don't know where the people are at because you haven't defined them, then you can't go there to meet the people and interact with them and produce the content and have a higher chance of it being consumed by them and then a better chance of them actually reaching out to you to connect on a better level. Okay, so that's how marketing works in this sort of space, and that's how you can decide what things you're going to add. Yes, look at those 4 foundations. Now there's 2 extras. SEO, of course, search engine optimization for your law firm, is relatively important. Perhaps not as important as some people think, but it can certainly be relatively important. That's the kind of thing I think you should be looking at outsourcing personally, rather than trying to do it all yourself. You certainly could if you had the time and inclination to learn it and the time and inclination to execute it properly. Not many lawyers do meet those particular criteria, and so I'm not sure that's necessarily something you should be looking at in-house. But you could. There's no particular reason you couldn't. You're a smart person, but you might just not want to prioritize resources in that area compared to all the other stuff you got going on. Okay, so SEO is certainly an area, and ads, of course, is going to be relevant. What I will say is look at these 4 first before you look at these 2. A lot of people think that ads will just save them. It's not necessarily the case. If you have a good organic engine going over here with these 4, these 2 are supplementary to it. They will add to it. They will make it more successful, and they will intertwine with each other because SEO goes with content, obviously. Ads will go with website strategy. They do work together, but it's not necessarily the case that just tacking on some sort of hired SEO program is going to fix an enormous gap in your foundation. So we're going to look at things to add, jot down the things you might look at adding, and see how we're going to go. Now, the third one, and this is a bit of a longer section than last time because this is the planning phase and we've got to make good decisions here. The third one, once we have ditched some things and once we have looked at adding some things, is what things can we improve upon? So these are things we did last year, we're going to hold on to this year because they either form part of that core 4 or we think we can just do a bit better at it. What are those things going to be? And how are we going to improve upon them? Maybe it's just a question of time. How do we go over time? We're just going to get better. We're getting better at writing articles. We're getting better at sending out emails. We're getting better at more consistent social media, whatever the case may be. We're getting better at it sort of naturally through the effluxion of time. That might be true, but you might be able to jump up a little bit more than just waiting and hoping that if you do stuff over and over, you will get better. So what are some ways we can look at improving? So let's say we're going to hold on to our content program. Part of the reason we did our review process earlier is because we looked at the things that did well. So if we're going to look at improving, what we want to do is produce more content that performs well and less content that performs poorly. And over time, we're going to drag up our averages and we're going to just generally be doing better. There's a point at which we reach that beautiful critical mass where to some extent, everything does well, even if it's garbage. This is the effect that you see a lot with people who have a lot of connections, right? They post some relatively inane quote, about leadership or something really benign that everyone knows. And if you posted it would just go and be useless. But they get like 75,000 reactions and 6,000 comments or something just preposterously out of proportion with the actual quality of the content. That's actually great because it means you need to beat yourself up a lot less once you hit that point where you can post a relatively, not necessarily the greatest content of your life, but still get a relatively good piece of feedback on it. You're probably not going to get there with legal content in the immediately foreseeable future, but over time you might hit that point where you get a lot of engagement no matter what you post, And that would be good for you, and I hope you get there sometime. So for now, what you want to do is look at those things you identified as performing well and go, why did this perform well? Let's say you posted something in particular on LinkedIn, and it got by far and away the most reactions and comments than anything else you posted. Why did it? What was the kind of content? And is it the kind of content you would be prepared to post more regularly? Is it the topic choice? Was it just that you happened to post a congratulations thing to one of your staff members and they happen to have a lot of connections and everyone just likes being generally positive about that kind of stuff? That's good, but you can't necessarily make congratulations posts your entire content marketing strategy on a social media platform. It's going to get old very quickly, and you're best off capitalizing on that by posting something probably a little bit more on message. So you can look at those outliers and learn from them, but what you're looking at is your best performing pieces of content that were perhaps more in line with your standard messaging or your practice area or whatever the case may be. What was it about it? Did it just trigger people a bunch? Was it controversial? Can you deal with controversy on more than a little bit each year? Was it a topic that people really happened to find particularly powerful on that particular occasion? Was it something topical or reactive or recent? Was it that newsjacking process I mentioned? Was it just something that people were right on board with? But you're talking about the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial or something as a criminal lawyer and commenting on the hearsay objection and how it worked in Australia, and everyone just found that quite interesting because they only understand the American rules now after watching what was going on elsewhere. That sort of stuff. Why did it perform well? And can you replicate or try to replicate what it was going on? That's an example. Improving, though, might also involve going to a course, investing in some training, sending the people who are responsible for this stuff out. It never ceases to amaze me that lawyers consider themselves to be excellent communicators and writers, and yet they are not prepared to accept the fact that perhaps they need to learn how to write for marketing purposes, and perhaps they need to learn how to be on video well, and invest a little bit of time and training and effort into that, rather than just assuming that they should be able to nail it first off, or even after doing it for a little while. There are plenty of things you can learn about how to craft an excellent article in terms of headlines and paragraphing and styles and length and detail and headings and images and all sorts of stuff that goes together towards creating an actually excellent piece of content for your particular audience, okay? So improvement might take many forms. It might take dominantly learning from the things that went well in the past or poorly in the past, or investing in some training and effort and actually taking that time to look at the analytics as you go and learn what is performing well. Okay, so we've done ditch, we've done add, we've done improve, and our last thing, we should now have a bit of a list, a bit of an idea, a bit of a plan. We should be looking at what things are there that external sources tell us we ought to be doing or how we should be doing things. Now, this is where I don't quite understand it, but there's a bit of a phenomenon where lawyers, in particular very senior lawyers and owners of law firms, have very strong opinions about their marketing programs. They take the form of things like, oh, I don't want to post too often, it might annoy people, for example. I hear that a lot. The problem with it is there's literally no basis for that concern. There is no justifiable basis. Like when people say that and they're talking about posting something on a social media channel more than once a week as being too often, they're just simply wrong. They are flat out wrong, and no data will support them in that opinion. Notwithstanding that, they tend to be intransigent in that opinion, and I have trouble shifting a lot of people from it from time to time. So what you want to look at is, okay, we're looking at adding strategy X, but is anyone adding strategy X as well? Now, careful footnote or headnote or whatever this is, you're not necessarily looking at what other law firms are doing here, okay? You want to be looking probably more in marketing land, which admittedly I might live and breathe more than you do, but be looking more in marketing land and less in lawyer land for this particular assessment, because the question is not what are my competitors doing or what are other law firms doing. The question is what opportunities exist or what are the prevailing views in the marketing space about which of these things I should be investing more in and which of these things I should be investing less in. I will give you an example. I was recently reading an article, and out of the many things that it went through in terms of surveying a whole pack of marketing people, it suggested lots of people were going to be investing in more content, both long form and short form and micro content. And lots of people were going to be investing less in social media advertising. Okay, so does that mean you necessarily need to follow suit? No, but what you're doing is taking a sanity check, best practice. If your current investment in social media advertising is nil, it might be that going upwards from there would be okay. But if your current investment in social media is $100,000 a month, then maybe you might decide to come down from there and steer that money into some other opportunity. So those are the kinds of decisions we're talking about. But sanity check, look at those external sources. Don't get stuck in your own head and don't just second guess everything. Try and make decisions based on data, based on, at the very least, what the opinions of marketing people are, rather than the opinions of you as a lawyer. You might have a good feel for marketing, you might have a good feel for connections, but the fact that you went and had 7 beers with your mate and he doesn't happen to be on LinkedIn and therefore you're not going to invest in a LinkedIn strategy, that's just not very smart, okay? Not smart. People make bad decisions through that kind of methodology. Take a broader sweep than just the barbecue conversations and find out what's actually working, what's actually looking like it's going to work better going forwards. And of course, those things that you literally haven't been doing, there's always a little bit of a space where you going from zero to anything is good. So if there are main areas that you're just missing, then they're probably good opportunities. You're going to find that those main areas I spoke about are going to come up most of the time in most spaces. So that is our planning stage. We're going to look at our review. We're going to come back to what should we remove, what should we add, what we should improve, and then we're going to sanity check it through some external sources. Okay, that's how it's done. We're going to, at the end of that, have a plan. We're going to know what are the things we're doing. We're going to know what are the things we're going to continue or add. We'll know what we're going to kill off. And by now you should be relatively comfortable with analytics too. So you should be in a good position to actually be having an idea as you go throughout the year and as you review next year about what kinds of things are going to work well. Okay, so that concludes our planning phase, and now we're going to get into our execution phase, which sometimes is where the wagons fall off, or the wheels fall off the wagon, but it's not going to be for you because we're going to do it elegantly and brilliantly. Okay, so the last phase of our little program for our marketing guide that we're utilizing to come up with a plan for our law firm's marketing strategy is execution, obviously. So here is where a lot of things tend to go wrong, which is that we don't really execute the plans that we have laid, and that's typically quite annoying. The most normal thing that happens is we overplan and under-execute. And the reason for that is that lawyers tend to be quite busy, and the demands of client work, which we frankly quite rightly prioritize at least a lot of the time, tend to supersede the demands of marketing work. Now, the challenge with that, of course, is that that is not a good long-term proposition, because at a certain point you will find that there are no demands of client work because you haven't allowed the marketing work to take a role of importance in your weekly schedule. So we are going to look at a number of things in keeping with our 3x4 mentality. In this particular phase, we are going to look at time, specifically your time. We're going to look at outsourcing. We're going to look at barriers, and we're going to look at scheduling. So your time. Like I said, the biggest problem that happens at the planning phase is this assumption that I will be able to deliver all of the things that I have got in my plan. Now, this is particularly challenging for people in solo practice or small practices where there's a limited available set of skilled resources who can actually produce this material that you are looking at publishing. Maybe you don't have a marketing person, you don't have a raft of junior lawyers or law clerks or graduates or whatever just waiting to produce articles for you on literally everything that happens in your entire legal area. If you don't have that, and you are therefore time limited to a much greater degree than others, but even frankly, lawyers in big firms tend to be time limited anyway, it's a challenge. And you really have one of a few options. The one we tend to go with is, well, I'll just have to get it done. The problem is that doesn't tend to actually happen. almost inevitably, the question I ask most people when we get into the planning or execution phase, if I'm actually working with them as a client, is how much time can you commit each week to this process? And they will typically say something like 1 to 2 hours. And that's being fair and reasonable. They don't typically say 10 hours, they don't typically say 10 minutes, because both of those extremes would be unrealistic. But what I notice after a few weeks is that through none of those initial weeks has that lawyer actually utilized 1 to 2 hours of that time for marketing. And so it is a bit of a challenge, okay? We tell ourselves we can do it, but in reality, can we actually do it? If you have year on year told yourself, well, I'll just have to do it this time, and that's not working, perhaps you need to come up with a different strategy. Like I said before, sometimes doing something is always going to be better than doing nothing. So as you look at your plan and you realistically contemplate the amount of time it's going to take to execute the plan, and I think it's a good idea to write this stuff down. If you were to do it yourself, or those things that you can or intend currently to do yourself, that might not include editing videos or audio or whatever, you might be outsourcing those things, that's fine. But if you look at the things you intend to do yourself or in-house, so with your own team, jot down the time commitment that you think it takes realistically to do those things. Say it's writing an article, approving a social media post, or preparing a social media post, maybe preparing some image, doing a podcast interview, and that sort of stuff. Write down the contributions of time that each person is required to do. And then at least double it, because whatever you wrote down, you're probably being extremely optimistic. And typically things take far longer than what we think they're going to take. We see this when we're estimating jobs for clients. Inevitably, it's going to be harder than what you think. So you need to assume that right out of the gate. Then look at the numbers. Does your plan actually have an achievable time commitment for you to get to regularly? If not, then you have one of a few choices. The first is shift something into the ditch column from the planning phase, okay? If you're adding on something new, or you're clinging desperately to something that you know really isn't working that well and just don't really want to give it up yet, maybe that needs to go in the ditch column, because what's going to happen if you leave everything there is you won't know what to prioritize. And it will be too difficult, and it will be too much work, and you'll be going, oh, I need to find my 2 hours today, and I haven't found it yet. Oh, I'll do it tomorrow. I can't find any time. No, you need to find a plan that you can execute daily and regularly, okay? Otherwise, you just won't get to it. 6 months down the track, you won't have done it. Nothing will have been produced. Nothing will have been achieved. No lessons will have been learned. You'll have no data. You'll have no ability to improve on your marketing process if you don't actually do the things. So better to do fewer things and actually get them done than commit to doing more things and not getting them done. Now, you might decide that you do have the time, and then you might realize 1 or 2 months into this process that you don't. That's okay. That happens to the best of us. Don't be afraid to go, you know what? I'm not getting to all these things. I'm ditching 1, 2, and 3. I'm leaving 4 and 5. We're going to focus on 4 and 5, and that's going to be the mainstay of our marketing, because otherwise it's not going to happen. You need to be able to make that call and be prepared not to get to something that you otherwise had in your plan. Okay, so that's time. The next thing we need to talk about is outsourcing. A lot of things can be outsourced, but not necessarily everything should be outsourced. Obviously, I'm a little biased in this question because I run a law firm marketing agency, and so I am one of the people to whom you could outsource things. There are things that should or could be outsourced, so what are they? You can outsource video editing and audio editing very easily. Not to me necessarily. That's going to be someone you might find on Fiverr. You might find them on whatever Udemy is called now. No, not Udemy, Upwork. There we go. Somewhere where you get someone, you could find a uni student probably who can do it for relatively low cost. It's going to be better than you figuring out how to use Adobe Premiere or Final Cut Pro or whatever. And that will not be an expensive exercise. That kind of tech stuff is easily outsourced and probably a good idea to do it. Do you need to outsource, though, the video production? Not necessarily. I know that we like the highly produced things, but if you're going to make video marketing a regular part of your process, I think personally the time investment in actually getting a half-decent camera and audio setup, getting a half-decent lighting setup, understanding how to use the technology and having it there ready to go so that you can do it whenever you feel like and not having to make a huge production of it. I think that's a worthwhile investment personally. Other people disagree with me, and that's fine. But you've just got to think through the process. First question is, can it be outsourced? To most things, the answer is yes. Almost everything here can be outsourced. The second thing is, do I want to outsource it? Okay, you can't outsource your face, you can't outsource your voice, obviously. So in terms of can, those are obvious exceptions to the rule. But you might not want to outsource video production because you might want to do talking head. You can produce videos that are just text and music and sliding images and whatever, but you might want to do talking head stuff like I'm doing now, in which case you simply cannot outsource and you will not outsource it, so you need to find another way around. Article writing can be outsourced. I've done some commentary on that previously. You've got to pick carefully here, okay? Legal content is not easy to produce, and that's probably the reason why most law firms tend to do it in-house. I have that unique selling proposition here where I am actually a lawyer and I do marketing content for law firms. So I'm special, and that's what I tell myself to make myself feel good on a regular basis. But you need to be careful outsourcing written content, but it can be done. You need to be prepared to go through the process and make sure it's good and aligned with your firm's voice and all that sort of stuff. But otherwise, that can be done. Social media can definitely be outsourced. You probably don't want to outsource actual lead inquiry. I know a lot of our US colleagues tend to do this. In Australia, the tendency is for lawyers to actually deal with initial inquiries. Whether or not that is a good thing, it is an opportunity for you to practice your sales and marketing techniques in a face-to-face environment. But within your plan, you will find that most things can be outsourced, but of course that's going to be then costing you money. So you've got this trade-off, time versus money. It is an old trade-off and it's one that people commonly see. I can't make that decision for you. You need to consider it. What is it worth? And that's where the time comes in. If you're time billing, or at least you have an idea of the cost of a human in your firm per hour, if you've done that maths, and if you're a business person, I hope you have, and you are looking at the fact, and this is not a totally made up number, that to produce an article, by the time something has been read and researched and written and reviewed and rewritten and then reviewed again and published, it could be costing you upwards of $1,500 to $2,500 per article. And I know it seems like it's costing you zero because you're not actually forking out money, but if you're otherwise busy and you're otherwise able to apply your effort to generating revenue with that time, that's not necessarily a good expenditure of your time if you're getting a quality article for perhaps less than that investment from an outsourced person. So you need to be able to make those rational decisions. But if you have copious amounts of time because you're new in business or you don't have that many clients yet or something like that, you might like to do it yourself. So that is the outsourcing process and the considerations that you need to take into account there as well. Barriers. We put up a lot of barriers that aren't really necessary. They tend to be tech barriers, or I don't know quite how to do it barriers, or what I'll call silly question barriers, okay? Silly question barriers are, oh, I don't want to start posting on social media because I don't know whether it's better to post it Thursday 8:17 a.m. or Tuesday at 1:25 in the afternoon. That's a silly question barrier. Get rid of that stuff, okay? Don't worry about that really fine-tuning detail. Most of those questions are not very good questions to be asking in the first place. The questions are, can I do it competently? And if not, how do I figure out how to do it competently? That is really the only relevant question to ask. To do that, you might need to invite feedback, you might need to have a review, you might need to look at performance of last year, which you've already done. So the question is, do you back yourself to do something competently or do you not? If you do not back yourself to do something competently, notice here I'm not saying perfectly, I'm not saying in the greatest possible way humanly imaginable so that literally everything you do brings in $1 million client. That's not how marketing works. If you can back yourself to do it competently, if you can't, what can you do so that you can tick that box? Okay, you don't know how to use a real camera. That is not a steep learning curve, okay? Yes, cameras have a lot of buttons and they can be really complicated, but the fact is, doing a video like this will take you probably an hour to learn how to do. Is that hard? No, that is not that hard. So, it's a barrier that's semi-fictitious and that you're making it more complicated than it has to be. And I do this. It's natural human tendency when we just don't quite know, we're fumbling through in a new area, and that's fine. But the fact is, most of your barriers are going to be relatively fictitious. The tech barriers to entry now are extremely low. Things that used to be very, very complicated are now not that complicated at all. It's by far easier. Jump on social media platform of your choice, ask for recommendations, pick one, and then go with that, learn how to use it and execute the thing. You know how to type probably. If you don't, you know how to dictate probably. You know how to talk, hopefully, to a camera probably. And it's just practice after that, realistically. The tools available to make imagery are now abundant. They will do most of the work for you, even if you're not a particularly graphically minded person. Okay, so this is one of those areas in the I don't know what I don't know sort of camp, but the barriers to entry that you are creating in your own head as you look at your plan are probably less than what you think. But if they're not, if they actually exist, what you need to do is make part of your schedule, which is what we're coming to in a moment, overcoming those barriers to entry. Okay, you need to schedule that time as part of your marketing efforts rather than just going, oh, I'll get to it when I get to it, and putting it in the too hard basket, because we all know that the too hard basket tends to stay untouched for the vast majority of the year. And that brings us to the scheduling process. Now, if you just start the week going, oh yes, I know I have to get to this at some stage, you will probably not get to it at some stage. I won't say definitely. Some people manage to. Some people have this habitual tendency to be able to get to things when they plan it in that way. The better way is to plan a small, manageable chunk of time that is sacred and uninterruptible every single day. If it's 15 minutes, then it's 15 minutes. If it's 30 minutes, then it's 30 minutes. Set it aside, keep it restricted, do not pick up the phone, do not have your email open, do not do anything other than what you had planned to do for that particular chunk of time. So now the question becomes, what should that be in that chunk of time? You have your list of things to do. You know what you're outsourcing, you know what you're keeping in-house. What are you going to do? If you have a chunk of time of, say, 15 minutes, then there is probably a limit to what you can achieve in 15 minutes. You need to be realistic about that. I'm not saying you need to change your schedule. I'm saying it's more important that you do something every single day reliably than it is that you tell yourself you're going to set aside 3 hours on Saturday morning to get it all done, because we all know that's not going to happen. That reliable chunk of time is going to be far more valuable to you. In a sense, you just need to pick something and run with it. Maybe it's overcoming barriers to entry. You want to get into video marketing, you don't know how to do it. Monday, 15 minutes, research an affordable light kit. Tuesday, 15 minutes, research and order an affordable microphone set. Wednesday, research tripod and camera. Buy tripod and camera. Okay, then by Thursday, you've got the tech. It's all arrived because you got it express post. Thursday, learn how to use the camera in an appropriate video setting. Friday, find out where I'm going to set up my video marketing, how I'm going to do it, where are my lights going to be, where's my audio going to be, where's my camera going to be, how am I going to actually go about doing it. 1 week in, you have just set up the tech barriers, you've gotten past the tech barriers. Next Monday, record my first 15-minute video, 5-minute video, 10-minute video, whatever it's going to be. Record something. You're probably not going to keep it, but that's how it works, okay? You're underway, you're in motion, you're using momentum because you're figuring out how to use stuff, you're overcoming the barrier that you had, and you're making decisions. You might make mistakes, that's fine, we all make mistakes. You might waste some money, that's fine, we all waste money from time to time. Make informed, best decisions that you can and get underway with the process, because that's the only way it's going to happen. Now, you might say, oh, but Chris, we didn't write an article in week 1. That's fine. Don't freak out about writing an article every single week. You've overcome a barrier that has given you an entry point to an entirely new format of marketing that you decided you were going to do, and now you can make a video on Monday, and then on Tuesday, you can research the article topic, okay? Now that you've bedded that stuff down, you only need 1 of those days a week to be able to record your video for your video marketing each week. You can then use Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday to produce your articles. You can use Friday to produce your social media content. You can put it into a scheduling software. There's plenty about. Have a look at Buffer. Have a look at Publer. Have a look at, I think it's called Social Bee. There's a bunch. They're everywhere. Just Google, social media scheduling software. You'll find a ton of them. They're everywhere. And there you go. You've just done your weekly plan. you're regularly producing content. Now, one of those weeks you might go, oh, it's email week. We're going to email a broadcast to our database. Do I know how to use my email software? No, I do not know how to use my email software. And the person who set it up was a marketing person who set it up 6 years ago, and I've literally never logged in since. Well, that's a barrier to entry, and that you're going to need to solve in the same way. Step 1, what is our email marketing software and how do I log into it? That'll be day 1. Step 2, how do I actually use the email marketing software to send a broadcast? Do I like how it looks and feels? Do I need to select a template? That's day 2. Day 3, what am I actually going to write? Write it, send myself a test. Day 4, approve, test, send. There we go. Email marketing is now bedded down and we've solved some more barriers and we can layer that in as necessary. This is how the process works, okay? But don't commit to more than you can possibly achieve, and don't pretend in this little fantasy land of fiction that at some point you're going to find 5 straight hours in a week to do all of the marketing-y things that you told yourself you're going to do. Chunk it right down to small, constant achievements, and you will get much, much further than otherwise. Okay, so congratulations. You now have a marketing plan. It is based on what went well and what went poorly from last year. It is based on your capacities, and you've done some external validation and some research to figure out that you're using best practice, you're actually availing yourself of opportunities, and you're doing well in respect of what the general marketing land is telling you you should be doing. You have assessed your capacity in terms of time, and you have assessed your capacity in terms of outsourcing things. You have identified and have a plan for overcoming the barriers to entry that you have in order to execute the marketing plan. And you have set aside regular time. If it's not every day, it's every second day. If it's not every second day, it's every third day. But whatever it is, it needs to be uninterruptible time, okay? And if you can do that, and you can be working your way through constantly improving, executing, delivering content, looking at those 4 core areas, and if you want those 2 extra areas, then you will ultimately be doing better month on month, year on year, and your practice will grow, because this is the foundation of how you set up an effective law firm marketing strategy. Hopefully that has been helpful. Hopefully it has all made sense. If you've made it to this part, then well done. If you have a page of notes, then that's even better. If you skip to the end, then you probably need to go back to the start because you've missed all the good stuff. My name is Chris Hargraves. I'm from Known, Liked and Trusted, where we do digital marketing for law firms, and I am signing out for this very long little series, and I'll see you next time.